Hey everyone, I've been making sourdough bread for about 3 years now, and I've had enough good loaves in a row that I thought maybe I could share with you how I do it. So here's a little lesson in basic 50-50 sourdough bread. So you want to start by adding 450 grams of nice fresh sourdough starter, not quite at its peak. Add about 1,010 grams of tepid filtered water, and then add about 75 grams, or 80 of olive oil. Stir that all up. It takes a little while. And then add 750 grams of white bread flour. I use King Arthur because I'm a snob. And then add 750 grams of whole wheat flour. And again, this is just for a basic 50-50 sourdough. You can tweak it from here once you get this down. So now mix it all up in your bread bowl at superhuman speed. And then I get my big glass tray thingy out and put a little water on it, mix it up some more by hand in my bread bowl, and then I plop it all out on my dampened board. At this point, I knead it. This is one of the few times I actually knead the bread. That's just to incorporate all the bits, the water and stuff. So mostly what you do with sourdough, what I do with sourdough, is this stretching and folding. I only knead it a couple of times, once in the beginning and once you'll see when I add the salt and water. Otherwise it's this stretching and folding process. And I guess that, I don't know what that does. It helps with the gluten and protein and stuff. So ask someone else. So I stretch and fold it about 20 times at this point, and now I'm going to let it sit and cover it with a tea towel so that the flour can absorb the water. This is called the autolyse phase, and I let this sit like this for half an hour. You have to give it a little pat. So the dough has now rested for 30 minutes. This has allowed the flour to absorb the water. Now we can add the salt. If we had added the salt before, it would have hindered the flour from absorbing the water. I use 30 grams of kosher salt to about 10 grams of water. Himalayan pink salt is very nice for this too, but I'm all out. If you're using regular table salt, I think you would use less, but again, I don't know how much less, so ask someone else. I use the timer on my phone and these numbered cards to help me keep track of what phase the dough is in. Otherwise, it would be a mess. So remove your tea towel and spread the salt and water mix over the surface of the dough and then work it in. I use a combination of stretch and fold and kneading. You'll be able to feel when the salt and water is worked in, but don't worry about that too much. You'll be stretching and folding many times before you're done, so that salt will get mixed in. When you're done with the stretching and folding, cover your dough with a warm, damp tea towel. Bonus points if you use a cool sumo wrestling tea towel that your awesome niece brought you from her tour in Japan. Yeah. Okay, so now stay close to your kitchen because we're going to be stretching and folding every half hour for a few hours. To stretch and fold, pull out a section of the dough and fold it back into the center of the dough ball. Do this all around the ball, usually 4 to 6 pulls. Next, flip the dough ball over and tuck the edges under, spinning it lightly. Cover it with a warm, damp dish towel and set your timer for 30 minutes. After the 6th stretch and fold, you want to let your dough rest for an hour and a half or 2 hours if you need to get out of the house and drive around aimlessly. So you cover it and let it rest for 1.5 to 2 hours after the 6th fold. After the dough has rested for 1.5 to 2 hours, divide it into 3 parts. I use my scale to get the loaves approximately the same weight. Now stretch and fold each dough ball separately, flipping them over as we did before, tucking their edges under and spinning them lightly. Cover the 3 dough balls with a damp towel and let them rest for half an hour. So now we're going to form our dough for baking. You can either stretch and fold into round loaves as we just did, or you can roll them out into longer loaves as I'm going to do here. To make a longer loaf, start by squishing out a dough ball into a rectangle. Then fold over the short ends to meet in the middle. Squish into a rectangle again. Turn it around and start rolling it like a sleeping bag toward you, kind of tucking it under as you go. It helps to keep your hands damp during this process. As you roll, you'll need to keep reforming your rectangle like that so that the loaf remains as even as possible and kind of tucking the ends in. It took me a while to learn how to do this. You might want to just start with a round ball at first. When it's all rolled up, I flip it over and kind of thin out the seam and smush it down. It helps, again, to have wet hands when you're doing this. And then I flip it back over. I kind of tuck in the ends, smooth it out. It's kind of a little slimy sea slug at this point. So just do your best making it as even as possible. And then you can either bake it on a baking tray or you can put it in a Dutch oven. I have actually covered loaf pans that I use. My husband spoils me because he likes my bread. Now put your loaves in the fridge for 8 to 18 hours. If you don't have a covered baking dish, cover them with a damp towel. The next morning, while still in your jammies, get your bread ready to bake. Take it out of the pan if it's in one, and using a really sharp knife or a razor or this fancy tool that I have, we're going to score the top of the bread, and this is going to help it not split. The scoring is an almost horizontal cut just under the skin of the loaf. There are lots of really good resources on scoring out there on YouTube, and I would I would look at those. This is how I do it. I am not a pro, but this has worked for me over the last couple of years. Then I take a knife and about 3/4 of the way in, I poke 6 or 7 holes along the bottom of the loaf. This again keeps it from splitting. And this matters more with your heavier whole wheat loaves than with a white loaf. Next, I dampen the top of each loaf with some water. Preheat the oven to 450 degrees, but before putting the loaves in the oven, turn the heat down to 400 degrees. Aren't they cute? I bake my loaves for half an hour with the lid on and half an hour with the lid off. Thank you for watching, everyone. Holler if you have any questions.